Alright guys, let's talk about why the late models seem to have a lot better drivability and stuff like that than the early ones. I was talking to my friend Chip, and he goes, yeah, I like the late models because they drive so much better. So he's kind of a late model guy. The reason I've always been an early guy is because I've always been able to get my money back when I fix up a early car. So if I put a lot of money into it, usually I'll get that money back. Today it's becoming more of less of that happening because of the parts prices are so expensive and people want a lot of money for a project car. So these late models are kind of cool because you can buy something like this. Like I got this one for sale for like $5,900. Get in it and drive it. There's no rust. There's nothing to do. You just leave it patina and you can get inside this thing and drive it. In fact, this car, the reason I'm asking that is because it's got the original owner's manual. It has the original dealer's receipt. It has a lot of really cool stuff in it. The guy said it was a one-owner car, but it shows two different owners. Maybe he had a family member buy it, but the guy, who I'm selling it for, he said, no, I bought this car new. So I don't really know the whole story on it. All I know is what he told me. So anyway, let's take a look at what the differences are and why maybe these cars drive a little bit better than the early ones. One thing that was a little bit of an improvement was the ball joint suspension. You'll find a lot of times on the earlier cars that the suspension was a lot loose. Now this is not a Super Beetle. The Super Beetles, when they worked right, when everything's tight and the front end was all tight, they really drove nice. But most of them are loose and worn out today. So you get that 45 mile an hour, hand wheel, jiggle, and it's usually just a whole bunch of loose parts in the front end. But these had a typical normal ball joint beam. So they drove a little bit better than the King and link pin. When you have a really good tight King and link pin, usually they drive really nice too. But most of them today have some looseness in them, and that's usually why people will say that they don't drive as good. And the other thing that these had, 69 and later, was the 68 even had something different. It had 67 had the wider axles, which gave it a little more stability, and that helped. But then when they went to the IRS rear suspension, what it does, when you notice on the road, is you'll notice if you have an early Beetle that it might kind of want to do this going down the road. You get a little bit of ass wobble, I'm going to call it. The back end kind of wants to sway around a little bit, and that's because of the axles with the camber being off and stuff like that. Now, how to compensate that if you have an early car and you're getting a lot of that, what you do is you want to tow out the rear wheels. So a lot of guys will just put their rear axle in and not actually do the alignment on the rear, and the rear should be towed out just a little bit, and that creates a little bit of drag, makes it less of that wobble going down the road. So the later cars had the IRS suspension, which gave them that more stable drive down the road and made them a lot more stable at higher speeds. So that was one of the real big benefits to the late model cars. So in addition to that, this one here is a 1973. It has the transmission that has one half of the case that you can't unbolt, and that tells me that it is a 388 gear set. So the 388s came in the 73 and later, and the 388s give you that much taller first gear, second gear, a taller third, a little bit taller fourth. The fourth gear was a 0.93 instead of a 0.89. So the 0.93 fourth gear, even though it was taller shorter fourth, still had a really tall, a little bit taller fourth gear. So these like to go down the road a little faster. You can go 70, 75. I really like to take them and put the 0.89 fourth in them, and then it'll do 75 no problem, 80 even, and still be pretty stable, because you have that IRS suspension, you've got that ball joint front suspension, a little bit more stable most of the time, unless your ball joints are really loose, which some of these old cars, they're loose. So they had a lot better drivability, and a lot of guys have tried to incorporate that into their earlier cars, but some ways it can be done, but sometimes it just doesn't work. The other thing that was really good in these years is you had less overheating issues because of two things. One, you had the vented deck lid. So in 68 and 9, I don't believe they had the vents, but in 70 or 71, they started with, I think, a smaller vent set. I don't really know the late models that well. And then in 73, they kind of figured out that this one here works really good. It gives you plenty of ventilation for the engine. So it just, as for that doghouse fan that they put in it, it has plenty of airflow going through it. So you'll notice these run a little cooler going down the road. So the other thing that the later models had, in 71, they came out with the doghouse. The doghouse is what's behind the fan shroud. You can see that little, we call that thing right there, this thing, a doghouse in the back. And that's where your oil cooler is. So it has a separate area for the oil cooler. And that also helped with the engine running cooler. And when they put that in, they also had a larger fan. So they added a little bit more to the fan, so there's more airflow going through it. So between that amount of increased airflow, the better flowing for the cooler and the vents, these run a lot cooler than your early models. So guys try to correct that by putting convertible deck lids on their early cars, which does help a little, and they also put the doghouse on it, but it doesn't quite still amount to what you get when you have all these vents going across here. So these late models don't like to run as hot as the early ones, and the reason I believe they did that is because they did put the taller gears in, and the RPMs might be a little bit lower, so they needed a little more air to make up for that. So it actually works out really nice for these late model cars. So those subtle differences actually make them a lot more drivable. I noticed in the early cars too that you have a smaller back window, and you'll notice when you drive one of these with the larger back window, the rear visibility is so much better. In fact, I was driving this car. Like I said, I'm not normally driving a late model. It's been a long time. But I noticed that a guy was coming up on me very quickly and was swerving in and out of lanes, and came by and almost caught the edge of my bumper. So I was able to see him coming, so I was able to speed up. So I could, if I didn't speed up, the guy would have hit me for sure. There's no way. He was literally inches away and came through. So that rear window helps, especially when you're using these cars as a daily driver, with the idiots on the roads today who drive way too fast, because the cars today that you buy, you don't even know you're going fast, right? So these new cars, you can get a newer car like in anything from the 90s or late 80s up to the 2010s or 2020s. You don't feel the speed in your car. So the young kids think that, you know, these cars are invincible, and they can, you know, the regular daily driver cars that you get today are invincible, and you can just go really, really, really fast, and it'll do whatever you want it to, until they find out that it doesn't do that, and all of a sudden their skull and crossbones and candles on the side of the road, you'll see lots of them today because of those young folks and how they drive. So anyway, I don't want to fall victim to that. So you can see really nice out of the back window on these cars. Another thing that's nice on these versus the early ones is, of course, you had your gas door on the outside of the car, so you didn't have to open your hood in order to get to that. So that was kind of nice. The other thing is, again, these were 12 volt instead of 6 volt, so everything works a little better. The cars more reliably start. They they had more power than the old 40 horse ones. 40 horse came all the way up until 65, and then 66 they had a 1300, which was, I don't know. Anybody have a 1300, original 1300? Was it really any faster than a 40 horse? My opinion, no. They were slow as dirt too. So in 67, when they came out with and I call 67 late models, anything with these type of headlights, I consider a late model. So you guys with your 67s, you guys are like, oh, it's a transition year, okay, whatever. But I'll call those late models too, because they had these style headlights. And again, that's another thing that was a huge improvement. The headlights are so much brighter on these than they were on the glass headlight models. So that was another thing that was an improvement. And all those little subtle things amount to a little bit better driving experience, but you're still driving an old air-cooled car, which is cool. So there's a lot of neat things still about these. Another thing I really like about the late models, it's a really good place to enter into the market. So if you're brand new to Volkswagens, you can buy yourself a late model car like this. Like I said, $5,900 turnkey. Drive this sucker. Original, no rust, original fenders, original paint. You can't find something like that really old in that same price range. You're going to pay, upwards of over $10,000 to $15,000 for something like that. I've seen even early 51s going for $20,000, $25,000. And, and when you get into those, it's probably going to be pretty worn driving it. So something like this is a way better driving experience than those ones. So yeah, these just really had a lot better stuff to them as far as that goes. So the outcome of this is really, these newer ones, they feel more like a little bit more like a regular car. You can drive it in traffic. You can keep up with the traffic on the road. You're not forced to being in the right lane the whole time and with the trucks. So it is pretty nice. And they had, from the factory, an alternator system on them. So the charging system seems to work a little better. The bigger engine, the dual port engine, I was climbing hills at 70 miles an hour in this thing in fourth gear. You just didn't do that with the earlier cars. So these were really, really nice to drive, even up to the 79s where people go, oh, well, it's got the fuel injection. The fuel injection, when it's working right, it really works well. When it's not working right, it's a pain in the rear. Okay, but when they're working, they work amazing. And you think about that from the time era of those late models in the late 70s, 77, I think Beetle had the 75 to 7 had the fuel injected, I believe. And I forget when it came in. And then up to 79 in the convertible had the fuel injected engine in it. And they would just run so good when they ran. And when you had problems with it, as long as you were able to fix those injectors. Usually the problems we had were like, we pull out the injector, take a 9-volt battery and just snap it a few times, run some carburetor spray through it, make them work. Don't hold it on there. Put a 9-volt battery on and hold it, you'll burn up the injector. They didn't take that many volts. So they would just get stuck. And wire connections, you could take apart all of the wire connections and put my thing that I call magic spray on all those and increase the reliability of those late models with the fuel injection, and just get rid of a lot of your problems by having good connections. So, the complications of these were things like the fuse block is bigger, has a lot more fuses, a lot more wiring. So they had that. The thing that's nice when you're driving it is having the high-low beam here, and you don't have to go down to your foot pedal. Again, the visibility is way better when you have one of these driving down the road. You got larger glass, you can see better. In traffic today, it's a lot better. Another thing I forgot to mention is, even though these are ugly as far as the top seats, a lot of people go, oh, I don't like those late model seats with the high part. and all that, I call them high backs or whatever, and you like the low backs. The looks of that, it obviously is really cool. The early cars had more style to them as far as that goes. But when you're driving one of these, the later model, if you notice, it's more dished here. Okay, it has that dished area. And in your Volkswagen, when you go around corners, they like to slide you around in the seat. Well, you find yourself not doing that in these late model seats. So they kind of get you seated back there. You can drop your head back a little bit when you're going down the road. It's just a lot more comfortable to drive than the early car as well. So on a long trip, you really notice a difference on these late model cars. Subtle things that really made a difference. Of course, the heat system worked better, you know, all that stuff, because you just had, you know, the early car, you had your knob down here, the knob to turn on the heater, and these, all you have is just these nice little vent things. You just slide them up, and then you've got vents. You got air coming out here instead of way up there. It comes out right here, right over there. And you got all these extra vents in the dash. And when they had a vent system that worked, which most of these cars don't have a vent system that worked, they have a vent that goes right here and kind of blows right at you and sucks air in from under the hood, right here on the vent in the hood. And in the very late models, they had a blower motor in there, so you could actually blow air in here. And I could see somebody taking that and modifying it and turning it into some sort of a thing they could put ice in, right? And you could blow cold air in. So there's just so many, you know, you could use this hole right here and make that into like almost like an air conditioning. So there's just a lot of options you can do with these late models. And you know, they had a 100-mile-an-hour speedometer versus 85, because they might do 100, you know, even with that 93 fourth. With the 89, it would probably do it no problem if you had enough of an engine in there. I'm sure that even a 16 single or dual port would do it, especially if you had a performance cam in there. You get enough RPMs out of it, you could probably get to 100 miles an hour in the car and still feel pretty stable, because these, again, I don't know if there's no difference in the wheelbase, I don't believe. It's mostly just the IRS suspension and that rear wobble that goes away when you have that IRS. The IRS just got rid of all that because of the camber. The camber, and you need to put that drag in there to be able to get it to work. You know, because all mine, I've always aligned the rear. That's why people drive my car down the freeway and they're like, God, yours goes down the freeway way better than mine. And mine's kind of squirrely. It's because you gotta put the toe out in the rear. It's to get the swing axle to really work properly. So anyway, just thought I'd put a little video out on this subject, because some guys are, you know, maybe you're looking at cars and you go, man, those early ones are so expensive. Late model's a great starter car. It's a really neat thing to drive. It's still, and it's a lot more comfortable and fun as far as long trips go. I was going to take this on a long trip, but I'm a little worried. Not from the mechanical standpoint of it, but just where I was going to go. Long story, but this thing here I would definitely like to do. Would be fun to do a long trip in if I was going to keep it. Like go from, you know, across the United States or something crazy like that. This car would do that so comfortably and so much better than an early car. So anyway, I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and see your comments on this.